Okay. Oh, one second, please. Okay, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I'm delighted to be presenting our spring quarter professors to you. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Laurence Hillman, Dr. Gregory Shaw, and Dr. Sebastian F. Moro Tornese. Dr. Laurence Hillman is teaching Practical Archetypal Astrology 2, and this course is about a natal chart practicum. That's what we called it, right, Laurence? And
Close
then
enough.
and then Dr. Gregory Shaw is teaching a course entitled Neoplatonism, the Spiritual Tradition of the West. And Dr. Moro Tornese is teaching the music of the spheres, music in the Pythagorean Platonic tradition. So we'll just ask each of our professors to tell us a little bit about their upcoming courses, and then we can take some questions. So why don't we start with you, Laurence?
Sure. Well, I had the great pleasure of joining Cosmos Institute last fall and teaching one of the earlier courses on introducing practical astrology. And I hadn't ever taught. I've been doing astrology now for 48 years, and I'd never really taught an introductory course except to private students or small groups in my house years ago. But it occurred to me that I have seen and learned so many things that might be useful for others to learn. And I also know that many people who would like to learn astrology are turned away by the complexity of it, and they get confused and they're like, "This is too hard. I'm giving up." And so, as Greg and I just talked about 2 minutes ago, things need to be fun. And so I try to make a course that is that is easy to follow. And there is homework. It's a 9-week course that's now an evergreen course. It's a 4-part series. The first one is about basically really deciphering a chart. How do you look at a chart and know what you're looking at? It's like learning how to read sheet music. The basics. You won't play Mozart perfectly, but you will be able to read what the music is. And or the other analogy might be, you can order a meal in Paris in the restaurant in French, even though you won't speak fluent French. So that kind of a thing. So you have conversant understanding. I was actually quite surprised by how much people learned. I since have talked to a couple of people who were there who are clients, and their ability to speak very fluently, in my mind. They didn't understand everything they were saying, but they understood the deciphering, they understood what they were looking at. It's no longer a bunch of lines and dots on a piece of paper, but it actually becomes a story. And that's really the idea. So the second class coming up now in the spring is the practicums. Now that we know how to look at a chart and know what's in it, how do we make sense of that and start to tell the story? And that to me is literally like getting to Carnegie Hall, practice, practice, practice. So every week for 9 weeks, we'll look at 2 charts from people in the class, do 20 minutes on each of them. And the way I teach it, is activating the students' imagination. So I have them say things. Nothing you say is wrong. What do you see? What is your first hit? Where do you get stuck? Where are you interested? What catches your attention? That kind of a way. And that makes it hopefully more fun. And people will, be engaged and do their own things. I'm not just sitting there lecturing. It's a 90-minute class for 9 weeks. And so I start always with a short presentation of something that's relevant to practicing astrology. In other words, to reading a chart, different topics each week, and that's in the outline. And that's just a short presentation to get us into the mood and get us going. And so you have some new theory as well of things that are useful to know. And then from there we dive into at least a full hour of reading charts. And with input from the students, with input from me, there may be charts that I know, there may be celebrities, there may be charts from people in the class. Whatever they are, we learn to become comfortable with actually doing something with a chart and being able to say intelligent things with it. That's the second module. The third one in the summer will be about transits, how to work with transits and how to read them and so forth. And then the fourth one, is about partnerships. So that's the cycle. Then we start again with with a new cycle of teaching it live, the introductory course again, number one. So those who want to take number two, I'm strongly advising them to either be quite familiar with astrology or to take the first course, which they can take online by themselves in a 9-week, and do that at their own pace. Technically, I guess you could do it all in a day if you're crazy, but hey, why not? But otherwise, do it over whatever suits you, but study that so that you are fluent enough to really get the most out of the chart. But you can also be a professional astrologer and just be curious to become, more comfortable with the language by practicing with other people's insights. I learn new things by talking to other astrologers all the time because we can get quite one-tracked, and so having other people's input is helpful. So I invite anybody who's interested in learning, part two to take part one and then to come and join us. We look forward to seeing you in class.
Thank you, Laurence. Yes, very exciting. I am moderating all of the classes, so I'm kind of like learning by osmosis, and I can attest that the classes with Laurence are really fascinating because there are all these different astrologers with their viewpoints, kind of adding their 2 cents, and it really becomes a really rich discussion. So, thank you for that, Laurence. Shall we go to you now, Greg?
Sure. Right. Well, I'd like to take Lawrence's class. Sounds really fascinating. I've been interested in astrology and know it in quotes have known it for a long time, but not in a way where I feel like I'm really conversant with it and can play it as if it were a musical instrument. And it sounds like you invite people to do that, Laurence. So sounds like a great course. My
Thank
course
you.
is Neoplatonism, the spiritual tradition of the West. And I titled it that because I did not know that the West had a quote unquote spiritual tradition when I was younger. I grew up largely exposed to Christianity and kind of traditional Christianity. And by that, I mean, how traditional can you get when you grow up in Nebraska, which is where I grew up? Um, I was hungry for spiritual experience and didn't find it in the religions that I was exposed to. So I gravitated to Eastern religions and learned how to do yoga and got a mantra and joined yoga traditions group. Became completely immersed in meditation and doing yoga. I realized it was really a profound and deep path, and it worked for me. But one thing that didn't quite work was that it occurred to me that a lot of us Americans who were immersed in yoga traditions were trying to pretend that we were yogis in a kind of Indian sense. Some of us took on Sanskrit names. We sort of took on an affect of being yogis. And some of it in some way seemed false to me and a little bit unmoored from our ordinariness as Western people. So I was hungry to find something in our own traditions that seemed to be as deep and as spiritual as I discovered in the yoga traditions. And I was fortunate enough to discover some translations of the Neoplatonists by a man named Thomas Taylor. And I began to read his translation of the Neoplatonists, who actually made the Platonic dialogues far more than just rational exercises or logic chopping. They opened them up. They opened it up to a kind of deep psychological reflection on what we are as human beings and what kind of world we live in. And it opened me up as well to seeing that nature and the world we live in is alive and intelligent. And you could use the word animistic to describe how there's presences that are intelligent and alive in everything we see. And the Neoplatonists lived in that world. So you could say that it was almost stepping into like a fairy tale, which allowed me to see the magic in the world that I always wanted to feel, but hadn't felt it, even with the yoga traditions, which are more, as I practice them, a way of sort of withdrawing from the world and escaping into a kind of alternative reality, a kind of a interior space. And I wanted more than that. And I found that the Neoplatonists opened me to that. They saw the world as a manifestation of divine powers and intelligence. So I began to read them, and the course that I'm going to be teaching explores this Neoplatonic tradition, beginning with a man named Plotinus, who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, and then lived in Rome. And he taught, he saw himself not as a Neoplatonist, that's a modern term. He saw himself as a Platonist, but for them, it was a spiritual tradition, far deeper than how we understand Platonism in most universities today or colleges. To be honest, I think that a lot of academics are still a little bit uncomfortable with Neoplatonism because it is a religious tradition, and academics tend to want to stay away from any sort of confessional, experiential engagement with our work. We want to stay objective and distant from it in some way, to be quote unquote scientific. And the Neoplatonists were deeper than that. They wanted to immerse us in the depths that we haven't explored yet, that can be found within ourselves. So I had a good background for going deep with yoga, but then I was able to apply that depth to the Neoplatonic writings. So Plotinus sort of starts the ball rolling in the 3rd century of the Common Era. And his essays, which are collected, are some of the most profound meditations on beauty, on the cosmos, on who we are as souls, that you'll read anywhere in any tradition. He's probably, and I think it's fair to say, probably the greatest mystic who's ever lived. He's an amazing thinker. But as I read Plotinus, one of the things that bothered me, and I wouldn't really say it bothered me, but it didn't quite satisfy me, was that Plotinus tended to interiorize the path and want to go within, similar to the yoga traditions. And a subsequent Neoplatonist named Iamblichus wanted to see this presence of the divine that Plotinus found within himself. Iamblichus wanted to find it in the world as well, and in our bodies as well. That what he did was to extend the spiritual awareness of the Plotinian Neoplatonists into our bodies and into the world. So he developed something called theurgy, which is a practice of performing rituals that sew us into the presence of the divine in the world and in nature. And in that way, we would become, as he put it, take on the shape of the gods, even though we're still in bodies. So that even though we're mortal beings, we experience immortality through these ritual performances called theurgy. And I think that particularly intrigued me because I had found that some of the deepest experiences I had had came in the context of performing rituals. So that's where Neoplatonism moves to. That's what I know most about, is this theurgical part of Neoplatonism. And finally, then, I want us to explore how this influenced thinkers in the West, particularly people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is a thorough Neoplatonist. He read all the Neoplatonic writers. He read Plotinus, he read Iamblichus, he read Proclus. And instead of footnoting them in his essays, he just absorbs them. And so his voice becomes their voice. And I can see Neoplatonic writers in many of the essays of Emerson. So we'll conclude the course with reflecting on how Neoplatonism is found in some of the contemporary writings like Emerson's.
Thank you, Greg. That's amazing. I think I know a lot of people were been waiting for this class because it seems like the tradition of Neoplatonism is so fundamental to the various spiritual kind of practices of our day, but that none of us have really kind of put two and two together like that. And I think bringing that knowledge forward in a way that's accessible is going to be very useful to a lot of people. We'll ask some more questions. We'll get into that a little bit more.
Yeah, and without like putting Laurence to embarrass him in any way, I have to say that your father, if I understand, your father is James Hillman. Some of his writings on the Neoplatonists were fundamental to opening me up to a practical understanding of the Neoplatonist archetypal psychology and incorporation of how the Neoplatonists talk about the gods as irrelevant to our psychological state. All of it is relevant and right on target. So I'm hardly the first person that's been working on them in that way. And I learned a lot from James Hillman. So that's just a point I wanted to make.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, this is really a fascinating discussion. I think I personally have a bunch of questions for both of you already, but let's give Sebastian a chance to tell us about his course, which is interesting, right, Sebastian, because you have concentrated on a lot of the same kind of material that Greg has, but from the perspective of the philosophy of music.
Muted.
Can you
Sorry.
unmute?
Yes. Thank you very much, Gelare, and I'm very glad to be joining the Kosmos Institute and teaching together with Laurence and Greg, because my topic is interrelated with both their topics, because astrology and music were sister disciplines in the Pythagorean and Platonic and Neoplatonic tradition, and also Greg's approach to theurgy. It has its musical manifestation, like a musical theurgy, like the world was created through music by the gods, and music is a way to reenact that same harmony within us, and making the possible contact between the soul and the cosmos. So my course will be about that the notion of harmony of the spheres as a symbolic conception. And symbol here means this idea of reconnecting levels. So I will be talking about the interconnection between music and philosophy, and also Platonic spirituality, because music is a language that is experiential. We go beyond the split subject and object. When we play music, when we listen to music, it's also a quest for the soul. The soul is that link between the visible, the objective, and the intelligible that is also within the soul. So I would like to present this idea of the harmony of the spheres as this intermediary level, the stars between the intelligible. For the Platonics, that they organize the world in this vertical, metaphorical scale, or it's called the Scala Naturae. The ladder of nature has an expression in music, like a musical scale of the planets, that the soul can ascend and descend when the soul comes to the world, according to Plato in the Timaeus. And then the soul can follow the same path to reconnect with this divine aspect, but that is also within the soul. So it's not literally outside. The interesting thing about music is that as a dynamic discipline can go beyond image as something external, because we are in our modern world, we are bombarded with images everywhere. So music is good for going back to a language that works previous to image making, but it's also imagination, but imagination as a creative imagination, like the world soul, according to the Platonic dialogue, the Timaeus, is this moving image of the eternity, according to Plato. And why music is connected to this idea of going to eternity as this space that can transcend the divisions of time. It's because music works in time. Music happens in development of melodies, variations, and the discursive process of making music, but then is supported by sound, and is supported by silence. And in this way, my course will be talking about the Apollonian aspect of music, which will be this idea that music is organized with divisions, with rhythm, with proportions, but those proportions at the same time are not like rationalistic philosophy present them. These are living archetypes, living henads, living gods that manifest, because even not only in the Greek tradition, in the Indian music tradition, the musical notes are gods, are qualities of the gods. So when you sing, you are putting yourself in contact with this creative energy of the gods. And if we call this musical theurgy, is a reenactment of the demiurgic process, the creation of the world by the demiurge of Plato. Plato in the Timaeus mentions that this demiurge is a god that creates the world through music, singing the world maybe, because Plato says that Timaeus is doing some kind of music as it explains how the world was created. The world soul is created through intervals that present the paradigm for the harmony of the spheres in the planets. So there are many levels of music until we reach the music that we can perceive. But it's something that we don't need to interpret as an abstract music, because it's a music that we need to connect with our whole being. What I don't like many times about the interpretation of Pythagorean music as only Apollonian, as only abstract, is Apollo dancing with Dionysus. Everything must be like the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. In Beethoven Ninth Symphony, we reach the Apollonian contemplation, like in the Adagio of the symphony, is something that is a space where this image of the eternity is moving, but at the same time there is a dance, there is an ecstatic dance at the end of the symphony that says all in humanity and all living beings are joined in the same cosmic music. That is a Dionysian dance. So in this course, I will try to follow a historical development from the Orphic movement that also mentions that music is the essence of the universe. Also, the mythological presentation of the Muses, Hermes as a cosmic guide that joins the heavens and the earth, and also the Muses, the sirens. And then we have the Pythagorean, more mathematical expression of these symbols, and then the Platonic and Neoplatonic synthesis. So I will finish with the.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't wait to take that class. I mean, yeah, it's very comprehensive, and like you were saying, so interesting that all the courses kind of are supporting each other in that way, and kind of pinging off of each other conceptually and theoretically, and at the end, hopefully, for all of us experientially as well. Okay, well, we're just a small group, an intimate group, so we can just be as casual as we want, and just take, we get to have these professors to ourselves for another maybe 30 minutes. So let's dig in and ask as many questions as we want, and please don't be shy. Just unmute yourself and maybe tell us where you're zooming in from. I kind of know everybody. Everybody here are already Kosmos Institute students, so that's kind of amazing. And I appreciate you guys making the time to be here with us today. Margie, Lauren, Karina, and that's my mom's. She comes to all the classes. So feel free to jump in and let me know if you have any questions, if you want to just jump in and ask a question or tell us where you are or give us some of your own thoughts.
I have a question for Sebastian.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was really fascinated with your description of musical theurgy and the different composers and how their symphonies or whatever compositions they made could be experienced as theurgical ritual, in fact. And I'm wondering, are there certain composers that consciously saw their music as to be presented to an audience that would enter into a kind of a ritual kind of state where the music would have a transformative effect on them in your sense, in your terms, theurgical? Were they self-conscious of doing that to some degree?
Yes, that's a great question. Well, since the Renaissance already, we have Monteverdi and the originators of opera were consciously trying to revive ancient Greek music and Orphic music. Ficino was the first one who was singing hymns to the gods, accompanied by the lira. Lira d'abbraccio was some kind of viol, and he was the model for this origin of the Italian opera. So in a way, we have that kind of music, or Monteverdi, or Orpheus. Orfeo is the paradigmatic musician that combines the levels of human and divine music. That's one aspect. But then we can follow Mozart, especially, was conscious of having some kind of divine mission or divine vocation for music. So I think Mozart is a theurgic musician because he composed with all the music in his heart and his mind, and he was expressing that. And the most of ritualistic music of Mozart is the Masonic compositions by Mozart, the Masonic music, or the magic flute, no, with all the Masonic symbolism. So that's one of the more explicit examples of this theurgic music, because it has Isis and Osiris hymn, and all the Masonic transformation of the soul as a sacred marriage between the Tamino and Pamina, and this is mirroring Papageno and Papagena, all this coincidentia oppositorum, no? And then we have Beethoven also, who was composing from the heart to the heart. He composed this, when he said, "I'm composing from the heart to the heart," in the dedication of the Mass, when he wrote a Mass. But for him, it was more a spirituality, more Platonic, because he was identified with Schiller for expressing this music in the Ninth Symphony. Then we have Mahler, other composer who try to express all the levels of nature in, for example, in Third Symphony, or Scriabin. Scriabin composed the poem del Éxtasis, or how it's called, the poem of ecstasy. So there are many composers who were conscious, and Wagner, the Parsifal by Wagner says, for the consecration of the scene in the score. So it's consecrating, making sacred the theater. So many of the composers were consciously trying to do a ritual with music.
Thanks.
Thank you for that question.
No, it's great. It's a great topic.
Yes, Margie, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for all these really fantastic descriptions of courses. I'm already signed up for Greg's course, and I did one of Laurence, and I've just done Kieran's, so it's all tying in very beautifully. Just a little about myself. I'm an Islamic geometer, so I draw and paint Islamic geometric designs. I've been doing it for 10 years now. And I'm specifically very interested in well, what I've been doing research into is drawing geometry as a theurgical ritual, so as a transformative practice. And there's a great deal about this in the Ikhwan al-Safa, and they really combined late Platonism and Sufism. The Ikhwan al-Safa in Basra, and I think if there's any chance, Greg, that you could in your course go a little bit into this, that would be fantastic.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, because it's like the geometry, the symmetry, it all ties into the music, the poetry, the meter, ratio. It's
Yeah, as I imagine what you're saying, Margie, is like how we sew ourselves back into the cosmos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, visually through geometry and also through music. I mean, they all work together, these disciplines. I did take a course once with Keith Critchlow. I don't know if you're familiar with who he is.
I've done most of my training in London at used to be the King's, well, the Prince's School, but the King's School. So yeah.
Yeah, he's wonderful in sacred geometry discipline. So I'm glad you're taking the course, and you'll be able to help us move into the geometric aspects of Neoplatonism, I think. That's great. Thank you.
I read your books. Both of them are marvelous, really.
Oh,
Fantastic.
thanks, Margie. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I also have a comment for Sebastian. You said one word in your extraordinary description that really got my attention, and I thought, wow, I've never made that connection before, which is the word variation, which is, of course, the word for music. And I was thinking about how music, when sometimes, something can be played in a certain way, and then a couple of tones different, and you play the same theme, and suddenly everything opens up or loosens. And I thought about variation in astrology as a way of how we get stuck or fixated in a pattern, and how the creative approach to resolving those patterns. Let's say someone walks around saying, well, I have a Sun-Saturn conjunction, so I'm always depressed, those kinds of things, a fixated pattern. And the variation will be, what would be another variation? It's exactly how I teach. What is another variation on that Sun-Saturn? Let's talk about some cool things you could do with a Sun-Saturn thing, as opposed to the stuckness of the unresolved, unvaried approach. And unfortunately, so many astrology books and approaches to astrology are in those patterns. This means that, and that doesn't allow for any variation. I love that word, so thank you for that. My second question to you, if I may, just real quick. I have been for decades, well, maybe for 40 years or something, been wanting to do a project which I've never done, but I wondered if you ever heard anybody do it, which is to literally find a way to translate a natal chart into sound.
Oh, those are great comments and questions. First, yes, the notion of variation is great for finding this creative dynamism, between that is creating the cosmos, and it's great that it can be applied to astrology. And yeah, variation is in the heart of music, and it's the way that everything can happen at the same time at different levels, or how the Neoplatonist will say that everything is appearing, manifesting in every level, in each one according to its own level. It's also good that it can be applied for transformation, self-transformation, and not getting stuck. That's what I was trying to say, that many people that interpret this as an abstract system of intervals, and they don't see the dynamism as a musician, because I play the cello, so I like to see this more as music that is moving. And yes, thank you for that. And the other question about the natal chart and how can express it in music, it will be connected to making correspondences between planets and musical notes. and also Ptolemy has this idea of in his commentary in his yes, in Ptolemy in his harmonics has the notion of how express music octaves are fifths in the relations of triangular relationships, or he does some connections about octaves, how who express a musical interval of eight notes or five or four in circular patterns. So maybe that would be a good way to approach, like expanding on Ptolemy and his connections between music and astrology. I think that would be that would be a great project also.
I'm curious on this question, Laurence. Since you asked the question, I'm sure that you've sort of imagined what the answer might be. And I mean, how did you imagine that a chart could be musically expressed?
Well, I think Sebastian also mentioned the Dionysian versus Apollonic. I think you did as well. So what I sometimes in plain English call, left brain, right brain kind of approach to things, or rational versus imaginal, and I would like for my clients to have an experience of their chart that is beyond rational. It's not just information. Do 6 of these and 5 of those, and you'll feel better. But to have an actual embodied experience of some kind would be really quite lovely. We do that in lots of different ways, and you can play act the chart, you can embody the chart. I talk about them as actors, the inner planets, and these kinds of things. But it would be nice to add another dimension, just like I talk about, what foods are Saturnine, or what movies are lunar, or what clothes are Venusian, that kind of a thing. So to start thinking archetypally about planets, one other dimension would be music. We do it a little bit. We have a sort of a curated list when we work with organizations, and we try to introduce the archetypes or the planets through particular songs, but that's not the same. It's not as personal. So there are clearly songs that are, da 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 dum is pretty sovereign. It's pretty strong and powerful and solar in its expression. So the music in itself that can well embody an archetype. But I'm trying to make it more complex. And so my if that would be playing, certain tensions as chords, or if that would be as playing the whole piece, one after the other in some order, or if that would be playing, making it symphonic, or adding other octaves to them, or harmonic songs to them, or disharmonics. There's lots of different ways it could happen on a musical, practical way. But there's so many things that are in common, the 12 signs and the 12 keys on the piano that make up an octave, and these kinds of things. There's a lot of ways one could make a connection. And with computers today and with AI, I think it's not that complex anymore. It's just who has time, but it is a project. I was curious if you knew of anyone who's already done some of the work. It will be more fun to work with someone than to try to reinvent the wheel. So it's just been a topic that's interested me for a long, long time, because I love music and I play, and I just thought it would be a fun way to do it, to make it another modality for people to step into themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Amazing.
great.
That could be amazing if people were taught like the mechanism through which they could create the sounds of their own chart. I did an exercise with some of my students recently, and some of them decided to create like a playlist, but what you're suggesting is taking it a bit further, and really, like, I just would say one thing that to what you just said, Laurence. You said I think it's the archetype that gives form to the sound, rather than the other way around. And so, yeah, what a fascinating. Maybe you two should work together on that project.
Yeah, that would be great. Yes.
And you could
That
teach
would
a
be
class
lovely in
there.
my next life.
Like musical astrology.
Yeah,
Yes.
music of the spheres. Yeah, I mean, it's
Yes.
again, it's always been done by singular planets. It's right.
Mm.
It's been done as a way of putting music to the archetypes or to the planets. That's been done And that's what a curated list is, and that's a certain way to introduce the planets. I'm talking about a much more personalized, or talking about the events. If you could have any moment, what's going on right now, boom, push a button, and there it is. There's the sound.
Yeah.
I would love to
Amazing.
hear that, because we can respond on visceral ways that we that are Dionysian. I'd love a Dionysian read of my chart.
I'm seeing a really, really popular app come forward out of this conversation that could blow up.
Again, if I had time, it would be there, but
We
who
need a
has
tech
time?
person
I need
in our
time.
group.
But
Gotta
anyway,
mind.
thanks for the answers. They were excellent answers. Thank you so much for that. And the variations really was like a light went off in my head. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks everybody. I wonder if Lauren, Karina, Anna, do you guys have any questions? No comments, anything?
No, this is just wonderful hearing all of you, and just it's brilliant to hear what y'all know and to share it with us in this way with the Kosmos Institute. I've loved every course I've taken at Lawrence's and in Kieran's now. They're wonderful. So thank you. And I just can't, with the conversation was just happening, I can't imagine what it would be like to hear kind of the pattern, the sound, and experience that of what currently living in with an archetypal pattern, and then hearing the potential of what's possible to live that pattern through, and to hear it before then being able to live it would be cool. So I hope you all do something with that.
Yeah, I think this
Yeah.
is winning. This is a very interesting, interesting project. Margie, go ahead.
Yeah, just one thing that I don't know popped into my mind, and I was kind of thinking, if like the Platonists seem to talk about the soul coming down in a soul body, like a sort of psychic skin or something, and I was thinking about the work of Rupert Sheldrake and morphic resonance, and perhaps there is within the psyche actually exists already the patterns that you could be somehow tuning into it yourself by morphic resonance. Just a thought.
No,
I think
it's a
that's
good thought.
it's a great thought. And I think basically you're describing archetypes where we resonate with things that are universally recognized. And so it would be curious for me for music, because other cultures have different musical systems and things like that. So how that would work. But I think, I think some studies have been done on certain frequencies and things like that, how people respond and so on. But I think, I think we have a natural capacity to respond to universal patterns, and music is one of them.
And I think really geometry is one of them as well. We can pick up the harmonies in the geometry, whether it's Gothic geometry or Celtic or Islamic. It's like it's almost like a mirror of what is already existing within us that we tune into when we actually look at these harmonious geometric patterns.
I think too, Margie, that when the geometry is manifested in cathedrals and churches that express these geometric resonances and ratios, it's as if you're walking into a spell. And you're in the spell because you're in that architectural kind of, I call it a spell, and you feel it. And that's why people were drawn to those places. And that's why also this notion of a big box church is really such a disappointment, because the music is no longer expressed in that kind of architectural structure. And I think the people that were building cathedrals and churches in the Renaissance and earlier, they somehow still worked within that notion of a Pythagorean sense of a continuity between the divine proportions and how they're expressed in the physical world, and they tried to manifest it. And we've lost touch with that connection. And so we don't walk into spells anymore, or we walk into bad spells or whatever we might call it. But yeah.
There's even a connection to music there. Steiner used to design spaces, Rudolf Steiner. He had an instrument he made with 3 strings, and he would set the proportions, so the length, the width, and the height of the room, to make it simple, as 3 different stops on these 3 strings, and then I would play it. And if it sounded nice, he built it.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the kind of mentality that
Right,
we
exactly.
need.
I don't know. I want to advertise this book. This is one of my favorite books, a book that I've given away more than anything. It's
Yes.
a wonderful, wonderful book. Michael Schneider, The Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe. It's basically about numbers and how numbers show up in nature and in architecture and in sacred geometry and all over the place. It is a wonderful book. I love this book.
I have
So,
this
great.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, it's a beautiful book.
I
Yeah.
agree.
And
It's written in a simple, straightforward way, but it goes to very, very deep levels
yeah,
of
it's a
realization.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I've
Yes.
talked to him a few times. He was a math teacher in high school, and he started getting interested in the more mysterious sides of math, and look what he did with it. It's wonderful. Margie, I also wanted to just say I was once fortunate enough to walk into the mosque in Isfahan, the big one, and the painted tiles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the painted tiles, and also the way it's set off from the city, so from the geometry of the city. So you turn your psyche changes. You're off the grid, literally. And then you walk through this long entrance, and then you come into this extraordinary space, which is just covered with these blue tiles that are painted with geometry. Yeah, as Greg said it beautifully, it's a magical experience, which is the whole idea of good architecture, right?
Mhm.
Have you been there, Margie? Have you been to Iran?
I've been twice, yes. That's why I'm not allowed to go into the United States anymore.
What's
Really?
what's that, Margie?
Tell us
I'm
that
not
story.
allowed to enter the United States anymore because I've been twice to Iran. And I live in the Netherlands, and it takes more than a year to get a visa to go to the States. So yeah.
That's awful. That's awful. We should straighten that out. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
That's
Dear
dreadful.
God. Yeah.
I had no idea about that, Margie. I mean, yeah, I've been there too, obviously. But fascinating. I think it's in Shiraz. There's an old palace, and in that palace there was a music room. And in the music room, the walls were like they were made out of a certain material, but they were 3 layers of walls. And then there were these like just so beautiful, like the shapes of like musical instruments were cut out. And then you could see another wall behind there, and then there were shapes cut out from there. And so the sound had all these like amazing little like kind of organic spaces to travel through, and then everything was painted just beautifully, and
yeah.
it's incredible, just it's like the thought and amount of like thinking and organization and just the mystical kind of intentionality that went into what was built. And as Greg is saying, I think those things have really been lost.
I've been in that room you're talking about. It's so marvelous. It's like mukanas as well as all these different layers of reflecting sound. It's an absolutely amazing place. Yeah.
You know what occurs to me is that the Kosmos Institute, as I understand it, is an attempt to speak to the hunger for a deep meaning in our culture and in our lives that isn't really being met by the institutions that we have right now in the colleges and universities, that are more focused on information than they are in deep transformation of the psyche. And part of the problem is, I believe that we're in such a, what I would call a materialist mindset of a culture, that there's no recognition that there is a psyche. And so everything is presented in such a shallow way as just information. And then all I need to do is just Google it, and it's there, the information covers it. But I think that we want more than that. and we can't find it by searching for information. And what this does, and everything we've talked about, astrology, music, Platonic rituals, they all are integrated in a kind of a way of imagining the world that I think we're trying to help recover. Not so that we can go back to it in some sort of simplistic way, but just realize that this kind of depth is part of what we've inherited as people in the world, and as Western people in the world, that this is part of who we are. But we've forgotten it, and we need to remember it.
It's hidden in plain sight, and it's I am colorblind, and the other day I came across a colorblind test. It's a bunch of dots, and I don't not see color. I don't see certain colors
Right.
the same way other people do. The dots are there. I see every single dot. I'm not seeing the dot. But I asked my wife, what's the number you see? And she says, it's a number 6. Don't you see it? I'm like, no, I don't see it. I'm literally looking at it, and there's a big number 6 in there. So I said, well, draw it out for me. So she draws it out for me. I'm like, those looks like other dots. So my point is that just because it's there, we have to retrain. We are blind. We are literally blind to what is completely present around us all the time. And that can be, we sometimes need teachers. I need my wife to show me the 6 because I don't see it. And then when I see it, maybe I can recognize it, otherwise. In other words, we can be trained to these things, and we can be brought back to that. That's the job of a teacher in my mind, to show what's there that I'm not seeing.
Well, it's an interesting thing you say. That's the job of the teacher. And we tend to think of a teacher as somebody who gives us information. But I think you're talking about a teacher in a different sense, someone who embodies a vision of the world and can somehow transmit it to you, like the rhapsode in Plato's Ion. That he is magnetized by this sort of visionary state and then transmits it to the listeners, and then they're taken by the same magnetism. So teacher is really a much more it's more of a spell casting power than a source of information.
Yes,
Does that make sense to you? Yeah.
Oh, I 100% agree. And it's also that people come because they want answers that they don't have answers to, and that's not often found in information. What's the meaning of life? Why is the world falling apart right now? These kinds of things. If we don't have answers for that, we say, well, here's a math equation you can fix, or here's some information you can Google. It's going to go in one ear and out the other. People have significant existential questions because things aren't clear anymore. The world is sort of collapsing in its old scaffolding. And so we have a new job. Many teachers in preschool and grade school have been talking about that they become the parents, or they become the support system emotional because the parents aren't available. It's I don't want to use that as well. It's similar. I'll say that is that people have bigger questions these days, and we need to be able to answer them because we are so preoccupied with existence where things aren't clear, all of us, that unless we have some answers, we are just information passers on. And by the way, AI is going to do that way better than we can very soon.
Yeah, that's great. And I like the spell casting power of the teacher, because it's like bringing enchantment, no? Enchanting, also the power of sound and music is connected with that, because it's bringing this inner voice of things and enchanting us, and to make us hear again the voice of the genius inside everywhere. And Socrates is that kind of teacher, no? Makes the student listen to its own his own or her own inner genius, and that's a great thing for a teacher and for a student.
It's really incredible, and thank you for making that observation, Greg, because obviously the biggest jewel that Kosmos Institute is able to offer to our students is the collective knowledge of our individual professors, and being able to sort of make what this magnetism that you're talking about, this embodied spiritual experience through your own practices that you're talking about. One thing that we're doing is we're making that readily and easily accessible, because what you were saying, Greg, about institutions focusing mostly on delivering information or historical analysis, there are some institutions that focus on this more, embodied experience. However, they tend to be a little bit expensive, to say the least, and also require a certain amount of, you have to take a master's degree, or you have to, take a whole course, and it's expensive, and it's time consuming. So I think that's where Kosmos Institute is trying to say, here's the real deal, the true knowledge that you're seeking that's going to bring you to a place of meaning, but it's so also not very time consuming, and it's affordable. So that's kind of like the nice little added bonus, I think, of what we're trying to do. I did want to just show you all very quickly this. This is um, the sort of the what do you call this? Hide the yeah. This is kind of like our ninefold path of Gnosis that the coursework at Kosmos Institute is based upon, and we're going to be putting out some information, a little bit clear information, but it's basically we're trying to address, as you were saying, Sebastian, the variations of consciousness, the variations of embodiment and existence. We are not just one human body with a brain. We have multiple layers and multiple dimensions to our being, and each of those dimensions requires a certain type of engagement, or a certain type of knowledge, or a certain type of cultivation for it to grow. And so, as you can see, myth is right in the center, but there's religion, there's art, and science, philosophy, metaphysics, morality, psychology, and politics. We're kind of trying to address all of them, and that's why all of our courses and classes are kind of starting to fit together in this nice mosaic. So that's what's so brilliant about each of you, and what you're bringing to the world through Kosmos Institute. And I think that's the main message.
Kelara, as you described what Kosmos Institute is doing, and you compared it to some of the other institutions that are trying to do this kind of thing, but also attach it to getting a master's and having to spend a lot of money. It's as if what you're trying to do is getting at the essence of what people really want, spiritually or psychologically, unencumbered by some of the baggage that some of the other places are trying to do this, but they're still carrying a lot of the old baggage, institutional kind of baggage and bureaucratic baggage that makes it more difficult to get it done. And you're not doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a very strict, like, no bureaucracy policy, and it's all about just taking what you have, the pure knowledge, and just handing it over to the student. Where all we're doing is just like acting as a kind of a funnel, or what's it, like a conduit. I see my own role as like being in service to the sacred bond between the teacher and the student, which, as all of you have just said, is a potentially transformative and spiritual one. Not a transaction. It's not a competition. It's not an opportunity for one person to dominate another. It's not an opportunity for political, ideologies and, like, shaping minds and things like that. It's none of those things. And unfortunately, a lot of the institutions today have become those very things. And
Yeah.
so we really
Yeah.
do have a mission here to help people just go straight to the source, and be able to use the knowledge that is usually either hidden or misrepresented, or out of reach. Just have that immediate experience, as as Sebastian was saying, within yourself. Like, go straight to where the genius is within yourself, and you guys as teachers are the ones who will lead the students there. So I'm so happy.
Well, I'm really delighted to be able to have met Sebastian and Laurence and Margie and Lauren. And thank you for, you know,
Yes,
pulling this together, Galera.
thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
I
Yes,
really
it's a
appreciate that.
wonderful meeting. And
Thank you for joining us, Sebastian, Laurence, and Dr. Gregory Shaw. Oh, well, everyone's a doctor around here. We just deal in doctors, but thank you for your time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take
you
care
in
and thank you very
class.
much. Bye bye.
Okay. Talk soon. Bye-bye.